So I'm joined today by my friend Katherine. I've known her for a little while, and we're going to just chat a little bit about some of her history in the realm of spirituality. So, do you want to say hi?
Hello. Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for agreeing to interview. People always get a lot out of these. So,
Mm,
yeah,
Myself included. Yes.
yeah. So maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you feel is relevant. Anything that seems like you'd want people to know before we get into more spiritual type topics.
Okay. Um, I'm a practicing clinical psychologist, and I've been at it for, oh, maybe 35 or more years. I've been in private practice 32 years. And yeah, and I'm very invested in gardening, and I have a koi pond, and I'm very like I love working with the land. Um,
I love it.
I don't know what else to say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's plenty. So maybe just give us a sense of when you first became interested in spiritual topics, spirituality, awakening, Buddhism. I'm not sure all what's been in your history, but
Um, when I was in high school, I carried my Bible around. It was Be Here Now, Baba Ram Dass. And actually at a recent class reunion, one of my classmates said, "Oh, you were such a little Buddha in high school." And I didn't think of myself that way, but yeah. Um, I went through school and then took a trip and I was clearly an atheist and, radically so. Took a trip with my son and my husband to the Southwest, and I took a solo hike into the Grand Canyon on an old mining trail. And I had this experience that, it was ineffable. I couldn't really explain the feelings I was having or like the vastness of vision I was having, but I came out of that solo hike changed.
mm,
I wanted to find a path to pursue what that was, to just try to figure it out. So I started reading Buddhist texts. I was drawn to Buddhism, obviously, back from Baba Ram Dass, even though that was Hindu, but the Buddha had always had appeal to me. So I was really drawn to Buddhism because it's so psychological. I mean, you enter through the door of the mind. And I think so. I started with Pema Chodron, who's a Tibetan Buddhist nun, and she had a lot of tapes and um, books, and I practiced that for a long time. And then I ran across Eckhart Tolle. And when I'd listen to Eckhart or read his books, and I read all of them several times, I had that same feeling that I got in the Grand Canyon.
mm.
It was just this profound, it's hard to describe. It's a profound feeling. And it's a more visceral sense that I would get. And I'd listen to him and I'd just constantly be getting that.
Mm.
Um, and so went on my way, and I'm practicing, obviously. And then in 2006, I decided to go on a Buddhist pilgrimage in northwestern India, where you visit all the sites of where the Buddha was born. We didn't get to go to Lumbini, which is in Nepal, where the Buddha was born, because politically it wasn't safe to do that at that time. But we did go to the birthplace, and not the birthplace, the place he grew up, his childhood in India. And then where he practiced the severe self-deprivation, like in the caves, where the wandering mendicants would go. And they said that he got so thin that he could push through his navel and feel his spine. He was eating a grain of rice a day or something absurd like that. And at some point, he came down off of this cave in the mountain. It was pretty cool to go in that cave, if that in fact is the cave 2,500 years ago. It's hard to know. And we visited Bodh Gaya, which is where he had his awakening under the Bodhi tree. And in India, in Bodh Gaya, they now have this big complex with a tree and a temple and like a path around it to circumambulate this way. It was clockwise. And I did that for, I was walking with a friend on the pilgrimage and walking around, and there are thousands of people just doing this from all over the world. It's really pretty fun, and it's noisy and candles everywhere and music playing. And I did that for a while, and then I sat down with the rest of the group, and I thought I'd been going for about 20 minutes, and it was 2.5 hours. It was just
Wow.
gone.
Wow.
So that was the other place I felt that visceral sense, right?
Can I ask you a couple questions about what you already described?
Yeah.
So I was curious, going back to high school when you were carrying around Ram Dass, was that a popular thing then? Did you know anyone else was interested in it, or do you just happen to find it in a bookstore? Or
A couple of my girlfriends and I, we were very rebellious, and we were the hippies in the high school, and we thought it was hilarious. Actually, we'd read it and just laugh at it and make fun of it even, but we had an attachment to it too.
that's so
So
interesting.
yeah, isn't it? And
It
then that,
is how these things come about. Like your instinct is there, even though like your ego might be reinterpreting it in a strange way.
right.
But I also wanted to ask you, and you said you're like a strict atheist or something like that. Was that more because of a scientific mindset, a skepticism, or was it like anti-religious for some reason? Or
Well, I think it was another manifestation of my rebelling from the family.
Mm,
You know, the family, a lot of intergenerational trauma. Okay,
mhm,
that got passed, and I somehow was the IP, we call it in therapy, the identified patient, the person who received a lot of the harshness from the rest of the family. So I was brought up as a Presbyterian. I never really grooved with it. I didn't like it, and I immediately rejected it as soon as I could. And yeah, as I went through grad school, I just became extremely rigid about my scientific mind, and this is the way to go. This is the truth. What they were teaching me was not the truth. So it was like chewing up and spitting out what I had experienced as a kid. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, I think I could relate to a lot of that.
yeah.
Um, the other last question I wanted to ask you about what you had already said was, um, when you were on this walk, I
Uh,
think you said it was a solo walk or hike, and you had this ineffable experience, did you relate that back to Ram Dass and or Buddhism? Did it kind of hang together for you, or was it like, I don't know what this is?
uh, I was confused by it because there was no way to label it or conceptualize it, but and I was drawn back to Buddhist texts. So I obviously made some connection, that I knew that I wanted to explore that experience and read about it and learn about it. And I just knew that was the way to go. And
Mhm.
Buddhism
Yeah,
really has been good for me. Yeah.
yeah. I can relate to so much of that. I had experiences when I was younger that seemed unrelated, seemed to be in different contexts,
Right.
but somehow revolved around or related back to something about awakening through like Buddhism or Zen. And it's funny looking back, like those were the sort of sentinel events of my
Mm-hmm.
spiritual life, so to speak. But it was so intermixed with all this other stuff, mostly mind stuff, that it's a little hard to pick out. But it was there the whole time, and
It
so
was.
fascinating. Yeah,
It
yeah,
is really fascinating.
yeah.
So,
Okay.
a little more background, because it's a long history that I've had to get to an awakening. In about 2010, after I'd been really feverishly studying Buddhism and going to retreats and things like that, I decided Buddhist psychology is so right on, and it applies very well to psychotherapy. And no one had really done a lot of scholarly work on that or presented on it. So I started to present on that to my professional peers, and it went well, and it consolidated for me what I was doing, and I was using it in my work, and I loved it. And then I started meeting with a group of women, and we had a women's sangha, and they all were very into the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, which is in central Massachusetts. Joseph Goldstein, he's originally from the Naropa group. He founded this place. It's a very cool place. And they have the Forest Refuge, which is silent retreats. You can go in for months at a time. But I went there regularly over the early teens into the mid-teens, studying with all these scholars and then doing silent retreats attached to that. And in 2016, I went to a retreat which was on the jhanas, which are absorptive states that the Buddha talked about, because I thought, while I was going through all this training, everyone, the party line was, you're not going to awaken in this lifetime. This is just to gain merit in order to maybe in a future life. This is just not done by many humans. So I did not like hearing that, and I was finding any way I could to get around it. So I thought the jhanas might be good because it was a very deliberate act of deepening meditation and going into different rooms in a house, basically. And I went through the retreat. I studied it for a year, read books on it, practiced it, and then went to the retreat and was really disillusioned by it. I just felt like this can't be it. It's too prescribed. It's too, when the Buddha finally awakened and came down off that mountainside, he said, I remember when I was a kid in my father's rose apple bush, or sitting there while watching him, and he got into this state of samadhi, right? And he said, that's where I need to be, not these absorptive states. And then he had his awakening. So I finally got off of the jhanas. And then in 2017, another sentinel event, my mother had become profoundly demented. I mean, she'd been living alone, and then she fell and broke her neck, and then she went into an inpatient setting and got pneumonia and sepsis in 2 weeks. It was horrible. And I would visit her there often, and her suffering was so horrible. She was so confused. She didn't understand why she couldn't get up and walk, because she was on these meds because she had a vascular dementia. So she was on blood thinners, and if she fell during the night, she could hit her head and they wouldn't, yeah. So just, I resonated like probably better than I ever have with her suffering. And I had such tremendous compassion for her. So I kind of had to fight my family a bit, but I brought her to my house to live, and she stayed with me from 2017. She died like halfway through 2019. And while I had her there, I started studying Reggie Ray, who is also a Tibetan Buddhist, and he teaches the Vajrayana text, which is a direct path to enlightenment or awakening. And it's all on tape in their books. And I studied that for the whole time my mother was there, and went through all the exercises again and again and again. And was hearing, oh, you're going to collect merit for the good things you do. Something, oh, this is great. Here I'm being so generous and open-hearted. I mean, it was really positive experience for me to have her there, but I was thinking of the merit it was bringing me as well. And I didn't have the visceral feeling as I was listening to his stuff. It just didn't resonate. I think it's really important to find something that resonates with you. So fast forward to Z-Dog MD, and I started really, I'd listened to him all for maybe 10 years, but then off and on. And I started listening to him around the pandemic because I thought his insights were good about that. And then he mentioned, oh, this guy named Angelo wrote a book and sent it to me, or sent me the first chapter, whatever. And I got, Z-Dog is into this stuff, huh? So he brought you on the show. And as you were speaking, I started to have that Grand Canyon sensation, circumambulating the whole thing. And there it was again. And I hadn't felt it really for years. But I knew immediately, okay, this is it. This is for me. So I bought the book and read it 3 times, and then I reached out, and I was fortunate enough to have you guide me and be my teacher, which has been fabulous. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I remember when you first got in contact with me, before the first retreat we
Yeah,
did together, I believe. Yeah.
it was in June of 21. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so you did the retreat at Asilomar, is that right? You did. Yeah. How did that go for you?
Um, so I was rushing to get to the first meeting and I fell and I really injured my hip badly and I was in a lot of pain.
That's right. Now I remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so mentally I just couldn't escape that, the pain, it's kicking myself for doing that because I was so geared up for this retreat. But it was a bummer. Yeah. And so that obviously I didn't have an awakening there, but I kept practicing after that and being very devoted to it. And then the retreat in April came. So yeah.
And what took place in that retreat?
Um, it was a really hard retreat for me. It was frustrating and I was projecting all kinds of stuff onto you during the retreat. Like at one point, we were all going around saying what we hope to get out of the retreat. And people were saying awakening and all sorts of things. And I said, yeah, I'd really like to awaken. I think that would be really helpful in my work, my practice, my clinical practice. And you looked at me and you said, we need to talk. What's wrong with that? And so I was perceiving you as really harsh, and you'd never been harsh, you know? And then during one of the Q&As, I don't know, like 4 days into the retreat, I was getting really, like, I could feel things were falling apart inside of me, and it was painful and it was scary and it was uncontrollable. And on reflection, actually, I was projecting stuff onto you. It was like my ego holding on for the last bit of control that it had. And I remember in the Q&A asking you, but feeling like what you were saying that day was not in line with what you'd been telling us, or wasn't what I expected. It wasn't what I wanted. And I was disillusioned. And I can't even remember what went on during that back and forth, but that was, you can remember that.
Oh, I remember it. Yeah, I want to give you or give anyone listening my perception of this how this played out, because it was very interesting to watch. When we met and we messaged here and there, and then I met you at the first retreat, but didn't have a lot of direct interaction with you. My sense was you definitely had insight. You had a very attuned, especially understanding of Buddhism, of spirituality, and so forth. But I could feel that seeking there, and so forth. But when we did the retreat at my house, I remember very specifically when you sat there at the beginning and said that I really want to get this awakening to help people or help my practice and so forth, or my clinical practice. And what I'm perceiving at this point is I'm looking at you, thinking, feeling, and so forth, that this person, you're so close. Like I could feel it with you. I could feel you. Not only were you ready and willing, you were desperate and also sort of ready. Like you were like teetering on that edge. And so when that happens, it's funny because people will literally spit out their fixations. They'll just tell you, this is the thing I'm holding on to. And that's what you were saying, even though your mind didn't realize it was saying it that way. I could just feel it. And also, I think you and I had gotten to the point where what that I do with some people, when I really feel they're like teetering, all I've been asked people, how hard do you want me to push you? Like, because I can push, if you need me to. And sometimes that's good, but we have to have a rapport, and you have to be ready for it, because as you said, it's a very, very intense thing to go through. You think you've gone through intense stuff until you start feeling your identity deconstruct itself.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget the exchange we had on that fourth day with Q&A. And it ultimately came down to something like this. I could just feel you were teetering on the edge, and you were sort of asking me like, what am I not seeing? Where can I go from here? But I could also feel that desperation. And I've just been there with people many times and myself. And I remember, I think what I finally asked you, I said, if you if you had the choice between waking up and it being nothing like you could ever possibly imagine, or waking up and having it go the way you want it to and getting what you want out of it, which would you choose?
Huh.
And you said, well, of course I would choose having it go the way I want it to if I
Did
had
I?
that choice. And then I think I just said, well, you don't have that choice, or something like that. And all I remember after that was you were so quiet. I mean, energetically quiet. I could feel it. There was just this sort of peace around you for the next day and a half or whatever. People were talking and doing their thing, and you were just sitting there in peace in the other room. And I
Ah,
remember this so clearly. Yeah,
yeah.
so good. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, well, directly after we had that interaction, I sat and I stewed and I said to myself, if it doesn't happen on this retreat, I quit. I gave myself an ultimatum. And then I just sort of, okay, let it go, and got back into the retreat. And then the last morning, we were doing the guided meditation. You said something about you might feel a tingling in your stomach, in your belly. You might feel it in your fingertips. And I felt that really intensely. And then suddenly, ooh, I'm feeling it again. Wow. Everywhere in my body was like this tingling, electric, uh, like chills and hotness and pressure. And it was overwhelming. And but I didn't want to leave it. I wanted to stay in it. So I basically I sat there all morning, even during the breaks and everything, and it was just there, and it was intense, and it was beautiful. At one point I felt like my head was going to blow off. There was so much pressure, like it felt like there was physical pressure inside. um and then the retreat ended, and I didn't know what had happened. I just didn't know. While I was sitting there for that morning, I started to hear the song, "We are stardust, we are golden, we are a billion-year-old carbon, and we've got to get ourselves back to the garden." And it's so interesting how that came up, because I think it was such a good encapsulation of what I was experiencing. It was beautiful. So I remember trying to explain to you what had happened, and it wasn't clear at all. I was bumbling with lights and tingling and oh, you're like, okay, good. And for about a month after that, I really didn't know what it was. I thought, okay, I've got to keep trying because I was so close. And I meditated. I'm like, oh my God, I feel myself so close. This is crazy. And we finally talked, and you said, yeah, I'm like 99% sure that you already had an awakening. I'm like, what? I couldn't let go of the seeking. It had gone on for so long. I didn't, it just kept going. So after you observed that I probably had awoken, it took me a while, but I kind of settled into that.
Yeah.
And that was lovely. Wow. And I've sort of been settling into it ever since. It's it's like 7 months or something. And
I remember that conversation as well.
yeah.
And I remember sort of saying something like, how do you know that you're still seeking something? How do you know there's someone there seeking anything? And you were just like, oh my God. Right. You could see that was just simply a belief moving through. And yet it had just been so consistent for so many years, it seemed real. And then you kind of look around and you're like, oh, it's really that simple,
Yes, the expectations, right?
Mhm.
Even though it was really, quite an experience to
Mhm.
have, I don't know what else I expected.
Mhm.
I expected to be downloading cosmic information and
Yeah.
like having the answers to everything. And
Yeah.
so it was the expectations again that kept me from really allowing it and just
Mhm.
being with it.
Yeah.
And yeah. And since I have, it's just been wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, not all wonderful.
Right. But it's it's fascinating because people who have been seeking for, literally decades. And I talked to a gentleman not too long ago who said 35 years, Eric, and I did an interview with him.
Yeah.
Super, super nice guy. but there's a sort of challenge in that you really do have so much background as far as what you think it's going to be, how you think it'll affect you,
Yeah.
collected all the things people said about it, and you can't even help it. It's just there, right? And at the same time, you really have done so much work and so much emotion work and all that, that once you really settle in and you let the expectation of the fireworks and all that stuff go, you really do have a very, very good foundation already for that piece. And
Mm.
that's how you feel to me. And now it's, you really are able to just let that presence be there as this, and
Yeah.
require nothing else.
And the absorption that I have now, like I have to time everything I do, because
Mhm.
I'll sit down and get into an activity and I'm lost. I have no sense of time. Um, whether it's gardening or whatever it is, or working, if I don't have a timer, because I don't know if that's losing yourself or losing time or perspective. It's remarkable, and it lends new kind of understanding to that idea of absorption, like the jhanas, right?
Mhm.
Maybe that's what the Buddha was talking about, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily like pushing yourself really hard and getting to where you have to go. Ugh,
Mm.
yeah,
It's nice to know in a deep way, instinctually, you don't have to do that. That's not what
yeah.
it's about.
That it's now unfolding. It's coming to me. You
Mhm.
know, I'm
Mhm.
not needing to just suss everything out and continue the search.
Yeah.
The moment I stop doing or whatever it is, I can get back into that stillness,
Mhm.
and then and you can be more passive about it, right?
Mhm.
You don't have to be out looking and working so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has such a neutrality to it. It's just sort of
Mm.
kind of a reset that's just always happening, where you just start fresh all the time, because it's just coming from who knows, here, nowhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm.
And I don't experience boredom anymore or restlessness or any of that. It's because if I'm not doing anything, ah,
Mhm.
okay, then I can just sit back down in the stillness, and that's fine, and see what happens.
Yeah. So nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't been meditating really as much. I think I'm just so sick of meditating.
Mhm.
And I'll get back into it, but it's been it's been nice just living and absorbing
Mhm.
whatever comes my way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, man, I'm just happy for you.
Yeah. Me too. Thank
And it
you.
and it happens in so many, no, my pleasure. It happens in so many different ways. And it's so paradoxical. It's very subtle in certain ways, but as you also described, it's quite not subtle in other
Mhm,
ways.
mhm.
And the beliefs can be so strange around this. The beliefs, you can still have beliefs, they can still be there, and they can even distract you. But when there's been a true shift in identity, there's something here that is undescribable, and you can't miss it. And it doesn't matter if I tell you I agree that that's what you're experiencing. You don't care. It doesn't even matter. It's that
Right.
obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I felt repeatedly while working with you, is that I had these realizations. Oh, that's what the Buddha meant, because I knew I had the Buddhist texts memorized, and this whole direct observation was pounded into everything he said, and okay, direct observation, I get it. Yeah, I got it, but I didn't get it. I was not looking inward for the direct observation.
Hmm.
I don't know what I was doing. I was telling myself just like having the right view. That's one of the Eight Noble Truths, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have the right view. I'd read through the Eight Noble Truths. I have it. I'm studying Buddhism. What's the next one?
Mhm. Right. It's so fascinating.
It
So
never
fascinating.
occurred to me that the correct view was not to have a view. That was just didn't even cross my mind. Oh, that's what the Buddha meant. Another one.
It's like, oh man, it's so fat. This is one of the more fascinating things to me, is this, how things that are true pointing, true clarity by a realized being can be so easily turned into concepts, and it will automatically happen the way our minds are structured. So one thing that's fascinating to me is to just look at the fact that thought, belief, which actually feels like a view that you're looking from when
Mhm.
it's solidified into a sort of ego structure, it's really a reflection. It's reflective in nature. So if you try to use that reflection to get out of that reflection, you just get farther in the reflection. You just lost in your own house of mirrors,
Exactly.
and then there's someone hopefully there telling you, not quite, it's not quite that. It's like, just stop doing that long enough and it will reveal itself, and it won't be what you think it is, and it won't be what you expect, and it's not
And
a
maybe
fixed
what
thing,
we
and it's
want.
not a certain view,
I
so
know.
fascinating.
No, it's just those thoughts are so they just entangle you. It's consuming.
Hmm.
I just find my way out of that. I know during that whole period of time, you kept saying, okay, but because I'd come in with all the Buddhist stuff and this and that, and you'd say, okay, but what are you experiencing right now? "Mm, Well, I'm telling you A, B, and C, and I'm,
Yeah.
Kundalini and blah, blah, blah. And yeah, but what is it now? What is it now?
Mm.
And it took a while for me to really settle into that and to just clear out the cobwebs of thought. But I have to say, I'm not thinking as much now. I mean, I'm thinking about what I'm doing, but
Mm.
it's much less of a trap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you were describing that, I was sort of reflecting that it's a common thing I see in people who especially have a lot of spiritual knowledge, like text knowledge about
Mhm.
Buddhism and so forth,
Mhm.
and that is a tendency to sort of come to, when they're working with me, like in that context, a tendency to sort of take a snapshot of experience, whatever they think they're experiencing now or last week or yesterday,
Mhm.
and then compare it to something they read about or heard about. And they go, oh, this is what I'm experiencing. It's like, no,
Right.
no, that's not what you're experiencing. That's, you're comparing it to what to something, and you're saying I'm experiencing it, and then it's conceptual. And it's like,
That's
just
for
come
sure.
one
Mhm.
step back, just step back a little bit far. Now, what are you really experiencing? Is there
Right.
even an experiencer right here? Let's just take a step back and touch into that and just feel it for a second, you know?
Yeah.
Do that enough times, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, oh, that, oh, okay, okay, oh, whoa. And it just deepens
Yeah.
itself.
It felt like there were just so many layers like that that needed to just
Hmm.
be peeled off. Uh, yeah. So it's been quite a process. And I remember when you talked to Zubin, you were saying, yeah, this could happen, this can happen, I'd say 6 months to a year or whatever. And I was incredulous. I just didn't believe it, but I was so thrilled to hear it. And the fact that it seemed to even be taking me long with you. My expectation was, of course, I'm going to instantly awaken because I felt poised to do so. But yeah, you
Hmm.
can't predict it. You just can't.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's people. So,
Yeah, I find the same thing. It's quite variable with people based on, well, I don't know exactly what it's based on, but some of it's just personality, expectations, beliefs, fear, and emotion stuff. Um, but there's also a sort of, I hesitate to use the word divine, but a divine sort of timing to it, where there's something that knows uh, how much you can take and how fast you can take it. And when you start to trust that pace yourself, strangely,
mhm,
um, that's when things actually start accelerating, because you're on a different sort of time frame. You're on the time frame of reality instead of the time frame of ego
mm,
and thought and belief. It just has a different cadence to it, and all of a sudden you just start feeling that cadence, and that drives you into this moment, now, now,
right.
now. Yeah, so much of this is timing.
You're reminding me of one of the things that I've heard you say on YouTube and elsewhere is there's more. There are powerful forces that will come to your assistance. So in the last part of the retreat, I was just very, very focused on that. Like, okay, I'm ready. Whatever powerful forces want to come to my assistance, have at it. I'm ready. And I could feel that I was ready, you know. And then another thing that happened on the retreat is, I don't know if you remember this, the night before the last morning, we were preparing for the bells, uh, the sound meditation, and I noticed and we've been talking about non-duality, and I noticed that one of Violet's bells was pixelated. I thought, oh, that's such a cool light. Where did she get a pixelating light in there? So it was actually a first non-dual experience, and I didn't realize it at the time. And you said it's really funny how we can just reperceive things like, oh, it's a light inside of the bell. It's not actually a pixelation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that wild?
Yeah. And I had some other non-dual stuff happen too in the last half a year, which has been, I mean, doesn't it, when non-duality is described, it sounds so shocking and like, oh my God, what is it? But it just happens. It just is there, and you notice it, and oh, well, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's very ordinary.
Yeah, it is.
And natural and intuitively clear. It's
Right.
nothing going, whoa, that's a wild and crazy experience. It's like, oh, of course it's that way. Amazing. I didn't see it this whole time, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
yeah, I wanted to also acknowledge what you mentioned about that. If there's something that sort of triggered this actual event during this retreat, it was what you just said, and that is something in you was really ready to let go enough to trust a different, let's say, force to come in. Now, when I say that, I say this with a lot of caveats. To give yourself to something more powerful than you doesn't mean a cult leader. It doesn't mean an idea you have about a religious system. It doesn't mean an idea you have about an entity. Those are all beliefs. You have to go beyond that. When you really start to go beyond that, you'll feel it. It's very powerful. And it's taking you to a place you don't know. Again, it's not a thought. It's not a belief. It's not telling you to do something specific. It's actually a surrender. And that, when you're really ready to trust that, and for whatever reason, and usually it's through exhaustion of everything else you've tried, realizing you can't make yourself wake up, you're in a very good place. And you feel it. It's sublime. It's a feeling of sublime. Something is more powerful than me here. I don't know what it is, but there's something. It's just moving this along, carrying it deeper into itself, and it's powerful. And that's a good place to be. And I'll make a very strange analogy, but if you watch a woman in labor, as the contractions get worse and worse, and the cervix dilates, and it just the severity of pain is so intense without an epidural, you get to that point where nature takes over, where you have an uncontrollable urge to push, even though it's so painful. And you can feel that. You can feel nature just taking over. It's kind of like that. You're in a place where you're so disoriented, and you feel a lot of confusion, maybe, and fear. And yet something in you is like, it's okay. You can let go here. And that's a really good place to be.
Yeah. This is what is meant to happen next. Right.
Yeah, it is. Feels very natural. Powerful, but natural.
Yeah. I remember feeling pretty peaceful about it and not having any expectations, interestingly enough, as we went into that meditation, and so then it happened. It was, remarkable.
Yeah. So would you give anybody who was sort of in your position, having had a lot of background in spirituality, retreats, Buddhism, and yet they just haven't had that? They listen to what you're saying, and they say to themselves, that's what I'm interested in.
Right.
But I know it really hasn't happened for me. What do I do? What advice might you give that person?
First of all, this is something you said to me, is everybody's awakening story is different. It's a story now. It's a recounting. It's not the actual experience. So don't have expectations for how it's going to happen. It's almost impossible to abide by that when you're trying to awaken, but the expectations themselves will keep you from awakening, because you're looking for the wrong thing. You're always trying to direct yourself, and find a teacher who is able to get you underneath all of the theory and the concepts, and because you can spin out of control forever with that. And I know many people who continue to, who just, are on their path and plodding along and not getting underneath their path. So whoever, I would say, find a teacher who resonates with you in that way, that it's not just, oh yeah, this guy makes sense, it's smart, yeah, I like how he said that. it's something more. When you find the right teacher, it's a knowing, it's a feeling, it's ineffable. It's not something you can really describe, but you know it when you feel it.
Yeah.
So I think that's crucial too. How could you possibly get out of this without a teacher? I mean, I know you did, but I
Well,
don't
my teacher, I had several teachers in a book called Three
know.
Pillars of Zen.
Right,
And again, I didn't have an extensive knowledge of Buddhism, but I had read some about it. I had taken a class in like, sort of Buddhist culture and stuff. I never got the flavor of it until I read Three Pillars of Zen and I read the enlightenment accounts where people literally described what you just described to all of us. And that's why I do these interviews actually. When you listen to someone's writing of going, this is what it felt like to go through Kensho. I got it. I was like, oh, that? Yeah, oh, okay. That's exactly where I want to go. And I don't care if it kills me. So I had
yeah,
teachers, but it was, Philip Capel Roshi for writing the book and the people who, describe their experience through vulnerability and stuff. So I would just say that it's very nice to have a teacher that you have a one-on-one relationship with, but it's not the only way either. There's
yeah,
retreat, there's teachers who put on very good retreats, and there are books and videos and that sort of thing now, and there's asymmetric, teaching and all
sure.
that. So but there's a transmission that has to happen one way or another. You have to really feel that what the flavor of it is, and also feel it deeply enough to know it's possible, that no, this is something I can like give myself to,
Right, right.
really, instead of just thinking about it for the rest of my life and seeking it, to keep myself in the safe place of the disappointed seeker, but it's
And yeah,
comfortable.
and assuming that identity, right? Well, this
Yeah.
is it. I'm plodding along. I'm trying. It may not happen in this lifetime.
Mhm.
I got so sick of following the breath. That's all I did for years.
Yeah.
So when you introduce different kinds of meditation, it was such a refreshing thing, you know?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I've heard from teachers along the way, if you're sick of it, it's okay. Just keep doing it instead of trying to switch it up a bit,
Yeah.
or you didn't have other perspectives to offer or other methods, you know? It
Well,
just
that's
seems
the thing that's so fascinating to me about what we're calling teaching, because I honestly don't really feel like I'm teaching when I'm talking to somebody. I just feel like we're working through this. So,
okay,
but, but I think my style would probably be the opposite. And the opposite is, well, if that's not working, let's just completely scrap it. Let's
exactly.
just, let's just see if we can just totally throw all those beliefs away and those practices. And let's just look at what's happening right now, and then, oh my God, I'm feeling that's scary. Perfect. Let's go there. Let's go right into the fear right now.
Yeah,
Let's go there. And so, um, yeah, really being willing to take fresh approaches, try new things. If you have a teacher and it's gotten you somewhere, but it gets stale
so,
and you really just can't move past it, try it. There's other people out there, so be willing to be flexible and mix things up, but keep your attention on that, or keep your intention on that. I really need a breakthrough. I need to go beyond myself, and I know it, and I got to find whatever it is that helps me do that in earnest. And I think if you use that as a sort of guide,
yeah,
you'll find the right resources, and it'll be some form of a teacher. But um,
sure. Yeah, right. It's I forget how you say it, the steel ball that you swallow, but it's
oh,
burning up, but you can't get
that's where you were during that retreat. Is for that
oh,
first 4 days, it's the red hot iron ball you can either spit out or swallow.
that.
You've gone beyond some point of no return, and yet you still don't know where you're supposed to go or where you're going, and the ego's in there trying to pretend it's doing something, but the larger part of you knows it's not doing anything, and that's really weird. Like, well, where the hell is this going then? you know yeah.
It's so true. It was really painful. It was a really hard time, you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
And I want to emphasize that for people too, that it can be, it really can be quite challenging and painful and disorienting in a way you're just not used to. It's not going to kill you, but there's your usual coping mechanisms and the ways you think about things to sort of pacify yourself and imagine the future when the present's just too uncomfortable. Like those kind of go away a little bit or a lot, and then you're sort of here in this soup of existence and frustration and confusion and disorientation, and yet something else is driving the whole process, and you can feel it, and it's powerful. And that's a really good cauldron of transformation.
um, that evoked something for me. I'm trying to remember what it was, but anyway, um, Yeah, so the last days in the retreat, I felt like there was this battle being waged, or maybe on reflection, I can see it that way, that I was trying to hold on. And because I felt like my ego was disintegrating, I was getting angry and feisty and, pushing things away. And this is ridiculous, but the other part of me was welcoming it in. So it is a very confusing, intense process. And I would say, just take it for whatever comes next.
Yeah.
Just stay with it. It has its own momentum. Has its own reason. You don't need to guide yourself through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adyashanti has a thing he says that I think is quite accurate. And he says there's kind of two sentinels that guard the ego boundaries. And the first one's fear. And a lot of
Uh-huh.
times fear keeps us from even getting close. We just keep distracting ourselves and, pretending we're disinterested and, whatever. At some point you'll go through the fear, and then there's often an anger barrier. Anger is because it's a powerful emotion, and you'll get this anger barrier. You'll feel rebellious. You'll be like, fuck you to this, fuck you to you, and and it just feels so, it's like it's kind of a rage, right?
Yeah, it is.
And again, if you're in a protected environment, you're in a retreat setting or whatever, you're okay. It's okay to feel that's the place to feel that. That's the place to really just come in contact with that, and yet still be willing to even go beyond that, then. And boy, when you go beyond that, it's like, oh, it's so different.
Oh my God.
You
Yes,
see, and you see it so differently that even the emotions were doing nothing but trying to protect you. It's just a misunderstanding of who or what you think you are.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it was interesting to observe all that or to
Mhm.
reflect on it.
Mhm. Yeah. When you're going through it, it's
Yeah, it
something
wasn't
else.
fun.
And I can feel it in retreat when people are going through that. I really can. There's
Yeah.
always one or two, and if the audience is big enough, there's several, and I can feel it. I kind of keep an eye on them and just feel into what's going on with them, and I try to gear the talks a little bit toward it. But it's a wonderful time. It's a wonderful place to be. But boy, for the seeming individual that always thought it knew who it was and where it was and all that, it's quite an upheaval.
When I tell people I'm going on retreat and oh, that sounds so lovely. I would love to do that. Oh, I know the people who have not had retreat when I tell them, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's not easy, but
yeah.
it's so worthwhile. It's
Hmm.
really the only way that I found to amp up the process, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, I agree with that. Retreat practice is hugely valuable, immensely valuable for this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But no picnic.
No picnic, not always. There are
Yeah.
times when it's incredible, and there's times when it's more difficult than you thought it would be.
Yeah,
And
for
it's
sure.
and it's always a bit unpredictable. You just really never know what's going to come and when it's going to come. So, yeah.
So true.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And what preoccupies you during retreat is so interesting. I mean, there have been for years I was just completely preoccupied with sort of what the people around me were doing and how I was being perceived. It was this weird.
Hmm.
And that's where my thoughts would go. That finally went away. I think after the retreat with my hip and hurting myself and just being so concerned that people, I'm limping along and just looking miserable and feeling like, I don't want to put this out there. And I think you had a talk with me at that point. You said, I don't even get embarrassed anymore. Like so what? So what if people see? And you explained to me a little bit about that, and that really registered for me, and that's unlocked something, and I'm much less absorbed in, sort of how my social self is coming across. I'm
Hmm.
just isn't there anymore. What a break that is. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't it? And then authenticity it's just another level of authenticity,
Yeah,
and vulnerability. Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I think people are going to get a lot out of this. So,
Good.
unless there's anything else you want to say to anyone watching this, or words of encouragement or anything.
Um, yeah, I think that for all those people who've been on the path for years who feel that it's just not gonna you're unworthy, it's not gonna happen to you, you're making some judgment about why it's not happening to you. Um, it's important to try it from different angles and don't just plod along doing the same old practice again and again and again. I don't think it'll get you there. You have to shake the system up. You can't just let it go at its own pace. And I mean, it's somehow very, it's ego syntonic. It supports the ego that you're doing the same practices with the same intent. You understand, you're sending love to the world. That whole idea about sending love out to the world, it was so theoretical to me. But once you have a shift, it's like that's the primary emotion you have. It's like that's the universe. That's the well that you're in. It's everything is like loving things when you settle down and actually are with them.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah, try different methods and I've had people tell me along the path, no, you have to stick, I've been in every form of Buddhism. I've sat Sazen, 4 or 5 times. I've done every form. And I've read, oh no, you have to stick with the same path and just follow it to the end. But I disagree. I think you need to try things out, see how they feel, see if it feels significant, and not just intellectually, but emotionally and psychologically, and keep looking till you try to find the one that unlocks the ego, I guess.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And I think, when I have smaller retreats like the one you went to, that's why I try to introduce different modalities, like even improv and things that people like improv. I want to sit and meditate and get rid of my ego. I don't want to, like, you want to get rid of your ego? Let's do some improv. And
Oh my God.
your public persona that's so structured and self-defensive, and all of a sudden it's like, no, you can't do that. You have to actually be so present that you're focusing on what we're doing.
Right.
And so I try to do that a little bit, and like, kind of pull the rug out in different ways, because you absolutely can identify with being the one that works really hard, meditates longer than anyone, has done more retreats than anyone.
Oh yeah.
And those can become identities quite easily. Just
Armor.
learning
Yeah.
yourself isn't enlightenment, or else every ultra marathoner would be enlightened, right? So
Exactly. Exactly. It's very true.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, okay.
So
Well,
and read Angela's book. It's incredible. It's all right there. Although I have to say, the first time I read through it, yeah, got that, know that, know that. So it's you have to allow yourself to open to it too. You can't just read it assuming that this is just another book with the same principles. You just have to really let it hack away at everything you've believed.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, it was very nice talking to you, and I appreciate the time for the interview. And as I always say, I'm just really happy for you. And
Thank you.
yeah, so
I appreciate you. That's been
thank you.
wonderful. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.